Alright, I'll just go Carlos. I'm just gonna go with phone. Oh no, I can't because yeah, I'll do that. I think I don't have a. Yeah, I don't. Let's put it right next to each other.
Right next to each other.
Right next to each other. If that's what you want, that's what I'll do. I think you're in charge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. I was a school teacher for a long time, and students never quieted down that quickly. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra McGonigal. I'm a resident here in Guilford. Live right up here on Potter Hill and have lived there for 60 years, so been around for a little while. It's my pleasure this evening to serve as a moderator of our Candidates Forum. I am currently town moderator and school moderator here in Guilford, so I have a little experience. Don't fool around with me. I did teach for 37 years, so there you go, at an elementary school, Guilford Elementary School. So it is my pleasure to serve as moderator this evening. We are being hosted by Guilford Community Church. Our pastor, Michael Graham, will be here shortly. I know he's in a meeting upstairs, or downstairs in this case, and he'll be here shortly. So it is my pleasure to welcome you. We are going to have two sessions here. The first is our session with the two candidates for executive counselor, and we're going to be joined by Joseph Kenny and Emmett Soldati. So I would welcome you both to come down the center aisle. Do it in an... And you know, coming down the center aisle in a church is a little different than coming down the center aisle in Concord. So there you go. I'll take that. Thank you. So let's begin with just a couple of rules that we have for this evening. Oh, boy. Thank you. Thank you. And you can give that to John if you don't mind. Thank you. Yes, thank you. We're starting with our executive counselor candidates because we understand you have a distance to travel, and we're trying to be respectful of that distance, and we feel very honored to have you both here this evening. So thank you for doing that for us. Just a little bit about the rules. We're going to begin with a brief introduction from our two candidates. It's going to be brief. It's just 1 minute, so we will be timing. You're welcome to share a little bit about yourselves and the reason that you're running for this office. Each candidate will be addressed with questions from you, the audience. We look forward to those questions. We ask that you participate in courteous discussion. And please honor that you will ask one question of the candidates. Both candidates will have the opportunity to answer the questions. As I said, the timekeeper will show you the yellow card when you have 30 seconds, and then the red card when it is time to cease talking. You will, of course, be welcome to finish your sentences. We ask that you, the audience, hold your applause until the end. And we will be welcoming a closing statement when we finish with our discussion here this evening. Some of you have submitted questions for the candidates, so we will try to honor those as much as possible given our time limits. Any questions, gentlemen? I think we are ready to begin then. Okay, and that's clear? All right. So, let's begin with your introduction. Joseph Kennedy.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So presently I'm your executive counselor. I've served 5 terms, and I'm from Wakefield, New Hampshire. I'm married with 2 kids, my wife Asha. And I am a retired Marine Corps officer. I come from a small business family. And one of the things that I love about public service is that I get to help people. And I've always put people above politics. And so if it's a problem for you, it's a problem for me. Let's solve it together. And so with the Executive Council, you know, we work with the public every day of the week. I've committed to making this a full-time position, not a part-time. I put 60,000 miles on my car each year to go out and serve in the municipalities, the business community, and to serve individuals. So I will continue to do that if I'm reelected. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Emmett Soldati. I'm a third generation from Somersworth, and 13 years ago after college, I did three things. I quit drinking, I moved back to my hometown of Somersworth, and I started a business, a restaurant in my hometown in the downtown, because I believed that bringing community together is how we could solve the challenges that we face as a small town. And since that time, I have used that platform to support and advocate for the recovery community and folks struggling with substance use, as well as the LGBTQ community. And I have also taken on some pretty large corporations. When HCA bought Frisbee Hospital, the nonprofit hospital where I was born, they wanted to close the maternity ward. And I challenged that and got the Attorney General's office involved. We were able to delay it and secure $2 million for our community for maternal and community health. When Facebook deleted my business's Instagram account, I took them to court, and they hired 5 lawyers. I took them to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, and I won a unanimous decision that really set a new precedent in the country for the rights of small businesses that use the platform. And now I'm running for the Executive Council, which is really your window into the executive branch and the administration of our state. And I'm ready to lead, to support the challenges of New Hampshire today, to secure a better future for the next generation.
So we thank you for those introductions. And we are ready for the first question. I'm not sure we have brave souls here this evening. Yes. Well, we do have a series of questions that were in the basket, and we separated them out because they are specifically for the position that you seek. So let's begin with the first one. What is your position on education freedom accounts? Who would like to go first?
So the education freedom accounts are vouchers, and what these are doing is they are taking public state dollars that are meant for our public schools and sending it to private and religious schools. And we were sold this program as being about school choice. But in turn, what actually happened is the vast majority of families that received them were already sending their kids to these schools. And now our legislature and Frank Edelblut, the Department of Education Commissioner, wants to raise the cap. And I'm concerned about them because any issue anyone might have with curriculum, bus routes, administration, you can go to your local school board and you can raise a concern because those are your tax dollars. You can't do that with a voucher. You can't challenge the curriculum that's being taught with your money. And when we were told it was going to be about $150,000, we are on track to take $50 million out of our state's budget for education and sending it not just to private and religious schools, but the largest recipient is Amazon.com. I want to see leadership in our state that recognizes that so many communities and property taxpayers are footing the bill to provide a quality education, because everyone in the state of New Hampshire deserves a good education regardless of the zip code. Currently, today, the state of New Hampshire spends less money on public schools than any other state in the country. That means you, the property taxpayer, have to make up the difference. And if you're in a property-poor community like Somersworth, sometimes it's too hard. And that's why Hilltop School, where I went to elementary school and my grandfather went to, had to close. I don't want to see more school closures. I want to strengthen our schools, and we need an end of the education freedom accounts and the end of Frank Edelblut's tenure.
Thank you, Mr. Soldati. Mr. Kenny.
Thank you for that question. That's not a question the Executive Council is going to take up. The Executive Council is in the executive branch, not in the legislative branch, and the Educational Freedom Accounts policy has been determined by the New Hampshire legislature. However, being a former state legislator, serving 3 terms in the state Senate, 8 years in the New Hampshire House, I definitely have a viewpoint on this subject. If you think about it, 5,000 under 165,000 children are educated in the state of New Hampshire. 5,000 of that are using Freedom Educational Accounts. That's a very small amount. And I say that's a small amount because that's really fitting the low to moderate income folks, or folks who are in situations where that child can be educated in a different setting, whether it's a charter school, whether it's some other alternative school, where that Freedom Educational Account funding can travel with the students, so therefore the parents are included in that decision making and can make the right choice for their child. We want the child to be educated in the best setting, possibly. A good example is the North Country Charter School. In North Country, it's the first charter school here that was established in New Hampshire. Those students really excel because they're in an alternative setting to meet their needs and to meet their abilities. So that's my position on the educational freedom accounts. I think it's a good little niche that helps out a lot of students here in the state of New Hampshire.
And that reminds me, let's try to hold our applause until the end. Would that be appropriate? Thank you. Does anyone in the audience have a question for our candidates for Executive Council? Yes.
So this, I would describe this state as largely a purple state. It's represented by, federal level, by Democrats, and the state level, a very large contingent of Republicans. How important do you think it is to have diversity within Executive Council?
So since Mr. Soldati answered the question first last time, let's allow Mr. Kenny the opportunity to answer the question.
I thank you for that question. That's a great question because I'm married to a brown woman, my wife, and I have 2 kids that are slightly are tinted. And any time they look at me as a white male in state government and they say, "Where's your diversity?" I say, "Well, it's in my household." So, but as far as diversity, I think you're looking at the ratio of men to women. Right now we have 3 men and 2 women. I think that's a good balance on the Executive Council. I would like to see members who are of color, who have different ethnic backgrounds, who have the opportunity to serve in the Executive Council, who can look at the issues that are trending or the issues of the day, whatever that might be. But I think diversity in New Hampshire, we don't say no to diversity, we invite it. And I think that's the way it should be. Thank you.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with Councillor Kenny that diversity and representation in our halls of government are important. You know, and your question also was about sort of the partisan or political makeup of our council. We do know currently there are 4 Republicans that sit on council. There's only 1 Democrat. Of course, if you looked at all the ballots that were counted in the last election, over 50% of people voted for a Democrat, but we only have 20% representation. That has a lot to do with gerrymandering. You might know that our district goes from Durham up to the Canadian border. There's 91 communities we cover. It's the largest of districts. Not every other councillor has that purview. That's really the legislature's job for drawing more fair maps. I also would say in terms of representation, I recognize that the average age of our council today is 73, and 80% of our council is currently retired. I do think it's important to have an even balance of people that reflect what is New Hampshire going to be like for the next generation. If we are concerned about transitioning to clean energy sources, making sure that solar is profitable through an accurate and useful net metering rate, that means we have to evaluate the people sitting on our Public Utilities Commission and Department of Energy to make sure that they are concerned and care about our environment and our energy. If we think about the housing crisis, I think it's important to have people that know how expensive it is to buy a home or even to rent a home in today's New Hampshire, because it is very different from my father and my grandfather's New Hampshire. And if we want to pass on the promise to our kids of what makes our state so special, it means our halls of government need to reflect that perspective and that experience.
Do we allow rebuttal?
Or just to add, I just want to add that the average age, the oldest member is 74 in the council. However, everyone's in their 50s and early 60s.
Thank you. All right, next question. Yes, sir. And do we need a microphone to hear the question? Let's try it without. All right, thank you.
So as a young college student, I relied on Planned Parenthood for contraception and treatment of sexually transmitted diseases because I couldn't afford to go anywhere else. So will you restore funding through Planned Parenthood for preventive health care services?
All right, Mr. Soldati.
So I would absolutely support funding for Planned Parenthood and all the reproductive health care centers that we have a proud tradition in New Hampshire and a bipartisan tradition of supporting. And it's important to note that the funding that goes before the council to support the reproductive health care centers doesn't go to fund abortions, it goes to fund STI testing, cancer screenings. And crucially, these centers that we fund and that Governor Sununu has put forward do so without ever turning a patient down regardless of their ability to pay. And when we think about the healthcare crisis that many Granite Staters face, being uninsured or underinsured, Planned Parenthood is doing a lot of the work on the ground to protect and strengthen public health for our communities. I would support contracts through the Department of Health and Human Services, and my opponent, every time Planned Parenthood has been in front of him, he has turned down that funding. And if you talk to folks in this region, you know that many of them drive down to Concord, to Greenland, or to Exeter to seek that type of health care, and we need to be supporting those healthcare centers.
Thank you. Mr. Kenny.
Well, first of all, I supported dozens and dozens of family planning contracts throughout my career. I've also supported many aspects of healthcare for women and for men from that standpoint as well. Here's the problem. From my standpoint, I believe that the federally funded healthcare centers need more funding when it comes to cancer screening, STT service, or pap smear, or blood tests, whatever it might be, for both males and females. And we're doing a pretty good job in the state, and I think in the coming years we're going to see more funding to the coast counties, to the Belknap counties, and I think that's something I will support. What's incongruent is House Bill 2, which states that family planning clinics that provide abortion services would be ineligible for funding. It's much like at the federal level when they had the HIDE Act, where no federal funding could be used for any health care service that provide abortion services. So I've always taken the position that I don't want public taxpayers' money being used for abortions.
Thank you. Yes.
So the law that my opponent is describing does not prohibit funding to Planned Parenthood. Let's make that very clear. What he is suggesting is that Chris Sununu is attempting to break state law when he puts Planned Parenthood contracts on the table. We know that's not the case, and this has been reported repeatedly in the news. That law was put into effect in 2021 and says that state contracts cannot directly fund abortions. And we have then put these reproductive health care clinics through audits to determine that there was no commingling of funds. And that was Senator Bradley's bill that determined that there was no commingling of funds to allow us to still fund these places. And still the Executive Council, including my opponent, didn't fund them. But what you have to ask Councillor Kenny is, before that law came into effect in 2021, why did you vote against funding in 2017 and in 2016 for Planned Parenthood?
Need to respond to that? Well, I think my opponent really needs to read the HB2 law, because it says directly or indirectly, and there's the gray area. So the council, what's the purpose of the council? Is to keep a governor in check. Otherwise, you would have a governor who would do anything that they please to do. That's what makes New Hampshire the most transparent form of state government in the country, that from time to time, we can keep a governor in check. That law says directly or indirectly, when it comes to providing abortion service, that it's not allowed under the current law. If Mr. Soldati wants to run for the legislature and change the law, go ahead. But right now, I'm voting against it because we're funding, with public taxpayers' money, abortions for Planned Parenthood, who are using it both from a building standpoint, administrative standpoint, or for employees who in essence are a part of the overall operation of that facility.
Thank you. Next question, please. Yes, in the back.
Hi, Betsy Kelly. My question has to do with security on the northern border between New Hampshire and Canada. Reportedly, there have been a handful of people apprehended crossing illegally, and yet our legislature and the governor have supported increased funding. And so my question is, do you support increased funding for security on our northern border?
Mr. Kenny.
That's a great question. Thank you for that question. So the governor passed an executive order with funding for a 2-year contract to put additional law enforcement up near the border, to basically provide overtime for our officers, whether at the county level or the local level, that would support the U.S. Border Patrol's mission of securing the border and providing interdiction, whether it be for illegal smuggling or drug interdiction or whatnot. If you're up there and you talk to local law enforcement and the business community, they will say that has been a tremendous success, and they have stopped whatever's coming over the border. Now, that's called the Swanton sector, and there's been thousands and thousands of border crossings over the last year and a half or two. A lot of it goes in through Vermont, a lot of it comes in from Maine. New Hampshire has a small border, probably about 56 miles, and we've been able to secure that. The other thing that I've worked towards also is to provide funding of $1.2 million for the North Country Dispatch Center so they can upgrade their communications and their console, and to provide an antenna on the Vermont side to prohibit gaps in communication so that when first responders go to a particular area, if they're out there by themselves, that they have first-rate communications. There's a lot of gaps up there, but I think we've done a good job. I think New Hampshire really should be proud of itself.
Thank you. Mr. Soldati.
Yeah, I largely agree with Councillor Kenny. I think much of that was federal funding, and it supports our state employees and it allows them to do their job effectively. It is worth pointing out that in the last 6-month period they used for that reporting for that sector, none of those apprehensions came through the New Hampshire part of the border. So I don't want to see this used to sort of sensationalize our northern communities who are resilient, and they also welcome in immigrants. But they also want to make sure that they are supporting folks whose job is to make sure we have a secure border, make sure the border is working, make sure that they have the appropriate technology, make sure that they have access and the ability to use their cell phones. So much of that federal funding is going to support a robust technology response. I don't want to see an outsized response to it, and I don't believe the current federal funds are. I think we just need to make sure they have the resources to effectively monitor what is a very small and very safe border.
Yes.
I just want to let the public here know tonight there have been some apprehensions here in the last few weeks. There have been several. It might not be during Mr. Soldati's reporting area that he's knowledgeable on, but there have been apprehensions up there. And lastly, on the communications piece, you can talk to any county commissioner up there for the last 2.5 years. There's been one person that's been championing communication improvement in North Country. There was pre-Drager, Drager, and after Drager. And when Drager incident happened where 4 people were killed, we had the poorest communications up there. And I drove home that issue on the council time and time again. We have got to protect our law enforcement and our first responders with the best equipment that they can possibly have on our northern borders.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, sir, in the back.
My understanding of New Hampshire's campaign funding law is that an executive counselor can take a contribution from a company before, during, or after a contract is being considered for the state. I'd like to know, A, is that true? B, do you agree with it? And C, what will you do about it if given the opportunity?
Yes, sir. Mr. Soldati.
I'm certainly not specifically aware, and I'm not obviously a current counselor. I am against it, both sort of in theory, but also specifically here in New Hampshire. Just personally, as someone who is running a campaign that is fueled by grassroots donations, I've received contributions from 1,000 Granite Staters, which is a record in modern times, to my understanding. And that is individual people. I don't take money from corporate PACs. And I think it is also important knowing that folks that are going to be sitting on our executive council making those decisions don't feel or appear to have tied interests. Because so many of the affairs, whether it's the Department of Energy or Environmental Services to the Department of Transportation, we want to know that our tax dollars are going to someone who is adjudicating and evaluating those positions and those contracts openly.
Thank you. Mr. Kenny.
That's a great question. And I had a dilemma with it earlier on because, not really a dilemma, but I was approached earlier on by the Valley News. John Gregg, who's the editor, and said, what about all this money that Burton's taking? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I take contributions from individual citizens or whoever that I feel is worthy to contribute to my campaign. But as time goes on, you start to see the influences and you say, okay, what's this contribution? So there's a couple of things. One is you can recuse yourself from contracts, obviously, which we've had 2 executive council more recently do that, because they took campaign contributions, and they recused themselves from a big contract. You can go to the Attorney General and check in with them and say, is this, under the ethics policy, is this permissible? So any contribution I take is ethical, and it's, if I have any questions, I run it through the Attorney General's office. Also know that in the legislature, there's an ethics committee which is independent of, the House and the Senate that treats these matters very seriously as well.
Should it be banned?
What should be banned?
Should those contributions be banned for any contract being considered by the executive council?
I'd have to specifically. Can you get what company or what contract or what specifically you're referring to?
The statement was about Federal Express and his contract with the state. And once the contract was signed, all the executive councilors received donations from FedEx. So that the perception as a voter makes me queasy.
Okay. I'm not aware of receiving a contribution from FedEx, but I hear what you're saying.
All right. Next question.
Can we just clarify? He asked a question at the beginning that said, is it true? I think I heard the answer is yes, it's true that a candidate or an executive council member can accept a contribution from a company with a contract being reviewed by the executive council either prior, during, or after. That's what I heard him ask. Is that true?
Okay, I'll answer
So,
that.
Mr. Kenny.
So anytime there's a contract before the council, that company cannot contribute to individual councilors before the council. That's the way it is.
Next question. Yes, in the back.
Could you tell me how you chose the developer for the Laconia State School project? And could you also kind of give us your thoughts on what you feel that would be an appropriate use for it? What would you suggest be an appropriate use for that 220-acre property?
I believe your last response to the last question was in response to the previous question. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Kenny.
So if you looked at the last Governor Council online voice minutes, if you will, there's an audio portion of my explanation on why I moved forward with the contract to, in essence, try to sell Laconia property. It was my second choice. My first choice was another company who I thought was deeply rooted in preservation and wanted to put housing at the forefront and was willing to work with the city of Laconia and also work on what I want is a museum. I'm sure everybody in the Lakes region wants a museum to capture the history of the people who worked there, who lived there, and were a part of that community many years ago, who still live in the Lakes region. So to better answer your question, I believe that it should be developed, it should be mixed use, it should be balanced, it should protect our natural resources, it should also consider all the snowmobile easements and the different right-of-ways that are on that property. There'll be some commercial component to it. I believe also we're going to remove the 911 to a different location as well. And that if there's other facilities, whether it's healthcare clinics or other social services that can be used there, I would be supportive of that as well. But ultimately, a developer has to work with the city of Laconia to work on a plan that's going to be acceptable to both sides and to make sure that ultimately the developer who develops does it right. It's got to make a profit, but at the end of the day, it's going to be best for the region.
Thank you. Mr. Soldati.
Well, I certainly agree with that goal. And I think it's important for the residents of Laconia and the surrounding communities to have a thoughtful and inclusive process to get there. But the process is really what we need to understand here. Because what we saw happen several years ago is the mayor of Laconia, Mayor Hosmer, wrote a letter while they were determining who to sell it to. And that letter said, our residents need assurance that due diligence has been exercised. And instead what was happening is we had a council and a governor who were quickly moving a developer who sold us a bridge to nowhere with a price tag that they thought would catch headlines, who was in court because other projects that they were working on were delayed by 3 years and had an active tax lien. That is not due diligence. And so what the residents of Laconia and the region really deserved is someone who was willing to take that project and scrutinize the prospective realtor and developer to make sure that we are not just selling you a bag of goods to get a flashy headline with $26 million on it. This is a big campus, and it deserves to be back on the tax rolls so that it can support the city in so many ways. But to do that requires a responsibility to the residents of Laconia to make sure that due diligence is exercised.
I just wanted to respond to the Robin Alexander attack, if you will. So for a year and a half or 2 years, we learned a lot through this process to state. That's a very complicated piece of property. There's a lot of infrastructure there. There's a lot of buildings, mothball buildings that are there. The Lakeshore Redevelopment Commission did a wonderful job to allow us even to be in a position to try to sell it. They went ahead and did environmental assessments. They checked out the Winnipesaukee Basin to see if it had the capacity. They looked at the park. They looked at all the other potential easement and legal issues with that property. So I think we got to a point where we learned during that year and a half and 2 years a lot about that property, which set us up to go forward with a second round. As far as Mayor Hosmer is concerned, there's nobody who would speak is more highly about me, about working with the city on this project for the last 10 years. From the day I spoke to Ed Engler about this and to the new mayor, Hosmer, it's been pure open communications. Presentations have been given to the city council. We have worked with the Lakeshore Redevelopment Commission. We've worked with the citizens. There is nothing that's been hidden. This has been straightly transparent to the citizens of Laconia, and I think it's going to be a great project. And if I am reelected, I will continue to work very closely with the city on this project.
Thank you. Next question, yes. Thank you.
Well, can I add?
Yes.
Okay. I am so inspired by this. Everybody drives them up a wall, museum, interpretive center. Because the house that I'm in, that I've owned for almost 20 years, was owned by Dr. John Randall, who was a psychiatrist who worked at the state hospital. And under the old conditions, and we deinstitutionalized that facility, that has a history with a lot of memories that we have to capture and educate people on the topic of mental health and mental illness, a topic that's very close to me and near to me. We have to capture it and educate people, and at the end of the day, I think we'll be better citizens for it.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, sir.
Yes. One of the jobs, according to the website of the Executive Council, is to oversee and manage the state's 10-year highway plan. And I'm just curious to hear each of your thoughts on what might be needed in the next 10 years. I know since I've lived here, the transportation, traffic, roads, it's just nothing like it was in 1987 when I first moved here. So I don't know if there's any vision, any thoughts, or something that you think might be coming down the pipe that would benefit our district especially.
Mr. Saldati? It's your turn.
So I live in Somersworth, which is right off Route 16, and if you drive north from the seacoast, you hit exit 9, and that'll take you to Dover. And if you go a couple miles north, you hit exit 11, and that takes you to Rochester. There is no exit 10 on the Spalding Turnpike, and that would take you to Somersworth. And exit 10 has been a footnote in the 10-year transportation plan since basically they built that highway. And I first ran 4 years ago because I wanted to see equitable infrastructure improvements that made sure that communities like mine had access to a highway. I had a small business downtown, and so much of our commerce was choked out by the fact that we didn't have an exit off of the highway. So I do think transportation actually is about how we improve the lives of Granite Staters. I also know that in the plan is public transportation. And we don't think of New Hampshire as a public transportation state. It is our 10-year plan that can include that to make sure that the elderly can get to their health care appointments, that folks can get to the grocery store. We also know that the Capital Corridor Rail Project could bring much economic activity, it could bring younger people, and could also take people off our roads to deburden the cost there. We actually had a free study that was going to be paid for by federal funds to do a cost estimate on the Capital Corridor Rail project. Our executive council turned down those funds, so that project has been stalled.
Thank you. Mr. Kenny.
Well, I was the former Senate chairman of the Transportation Committee many years ago, and I think those skill sets allowed me to understand the 10-year highway improvement plan. One is that all these planning starts at your regional planning commission. So all the ideas are taken from citizens and they're presented to the regional planning commissions who bring it to the Department of Transportation as a plan, a 10-year plan, a draft, and then it comes to the council for review. And they'll look at the highway funding that's available, what is new that's coming out of Washington, what are our needs. And from there, we conduct in my district, 8 to 12 different public hearings, where we hear from the public on what their concerns and input are with regards to transportation. Once that draft is finalized, it moves on to the governor, who passes on to the legislature, who then works with the House and the Senate to finally approve that 10-year highway plan. There's no doubt that we need a lot more money for our dams, our bridges, for our roads, and we need more money for our transportation. I was able to secure $1.8 million for coast transportation in Dover along the seacoast, which really saved them this year. That was very important. That's an important transportation system. Our seniors need transportation from the senior centers. We need to continue to focus supporting those transport buses that take our seniors to senior meals and also to non-medical appointments to hospitals. So we have a lot of needs. We have so many dollars, and we'll continue to work with those dollars in the future.
Thank you. Next question. So it seems I'm getting a timing signal here, and I neglected to introduce Jonna Davis, who is serving as our timekeeper. Thank you, Jonna. So I will take one more question. I did see your hand. Yes.
It's a one-word question and slow
Housing. Housing. So it looks like it's your turn, Mr. Kenny.
Well, we've done a lot. Invest New Hampshire put $100 million towards housing, which ultimately will probably leverage about 3,000 units in the state of New Hampshire. It was broken into three components, some capital grant money, along with some technical assistance money for the communities to help them out with their zoning ordinances, and lastly, some demolition money. It's been a start, but we know that we need 60,000 housing units by the end of this decade. And the thing is, do we let state control local communities and their destinations? And I grew up in New Hampshire in a small community called Wakefield, and it was a local controlled community, and that's the way we want it. We don't want state government coming in telling us what to do. We know there's a demand for housing, but state government can provide assistance on how to work with communities to encourage opportunities for housing. We also have the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority that provides public funding for housing projects. And there are projects going on in my district right now all over the district, from Dover to Whitefield to Berlin to Conway to Laconia. So they are happening. They're just not happening fast enough. So we have a supply issue. We don't have enough. We have to work through that issue. And yeah, I have a son that's still living at home, so I know what you're talking about. And he'll get out of there eventually.
Thank you, Mr. Soldati.
So Councillor Kenny is right that a lot of this happens locally. And what I'm concerned about is we are just going to leave it up to whether or not every zoning board and planning board is going to figure out how to build 60,000 units. Because it's very easy for one small community to say, don't worry, Laconia will handle it. Don't worry, Portsmouth will handle it. We are all in this together. It is true that Invest New Hampshire had $100 million, but that largely federal money is dwindling it into a shadow of what it was. So we don't actually have the same amount of resources to incentivize. And I agree that local control is important, and I think what we can actually do with the Housing Authority that Councillor Kenny spoke of is create incentives to actually encourage local communities to review their zoning and parking mandates so that they're not restricting or squeezing out developments, that they're allowing for accessory dwelling units to be built in their communities. And we can do that without requiring it through legislation. We can do it by providing incentives through the Housing Authority. At the end of the day, New Hampshire does not have a statewide housing plan. So there is no coordination between the folks that are checking the wastewater to the folks that are determining the permitting to evaluating the business licenses that are working on the lumber yard. We have to recognize that this is an emergency and it is a crisis. The 60,000 unit number is today's number, and we are behind. So to get ahead of it, we absolutely need a statewide coordinated plan that brings multiple silos in the executive branch together to address it, so it's not just on the back of one community or another.
Thank you. And so now it's time for closing statements. And I would remind you that you are limited to 1 minute. And Mr. Soldati, it is your turn to go first.
So when my grandfather started a restaurant down in Durham, Soldati's, that was enough to provide for his family. And it actually sent his son Lincoln to school, my father Lincoln, who then became a county attorney in Stratford and the mayor of Somersworth. Today, as a restaurant owner, we live in a very different world and a very different economy. And so I am running for the position of executive council because I recognize that to fulfill the promise that my dad gave me to the next generation requires that we address the challenges differently. When we look at the crisis of education of funding in the state, we need to be supporting and strengthening our public schools. You heard that only 5,000 students are taking advantage of that EFA program. Take out a calculator and take 5,000 and multiply it by $5,000. That's $25 million of your money from the state that is supposed to go to your public schools that is being sent to Amazon.com and private and religious schools. I think we need a leader at the Department of Education that understands how to support our local schools and our students. And so I am running to support our schools, to support reproductive health care access, and protect our environment. I encourage you to check out emmettsoldati.com, and I hope to earn your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm looking at this position and the skill sets that it needs. It needs to have relationships with your commissioners, which I have. We've confirmed 27 judges. I spent 150 hours of my own time with public hearings and traveling to Concord and meeting with candidates to make sure that we have a sound judicial system here in New Hampshire. When I look at the skill sets again, I've been a chairman of the Transportation Committee in the Senate. I've served in the House. I've served as a selectman. I've served as a veteran in the United States Marine Corps for 37 years in 3 war zones. And I've served in my local community. What people want at the end of the day is constituent service. In the last few hours, I've been helping out a woman who was given a $5,000 ambulance bill that she didn't know that she had to pay, which I've helped her out with. I've helped out another woman who's now, her water has been disconnected up in Colebrook. And who is she going to go to? She's going to go to their executive counselor, who are going to go to the agency heads, and they're going to get things done for our citizens. But we have a lot to do in the future, I know. We have a tram we have to rebuild. We have a men's prison we have to look at. We have the veterans campus we have to build out. But here's the last thing I would like to say. We're going into a downturn in our economy. You're going to need people who are fiscally responsible in state government. And if you look at the future, the next couple of years, you're going to need to have people who know how to say no in state government when spending comes along.
Right. So at this time, we would like to say thank you to our 2 candidates, Mr. Soldati and Mr. Kenny. I think it is appropriate to applaud this wonderful forum. Thank you. Thank you.
This is my bag of contracts for tomorrow's Governor Council meeting. I got to read them.
All right, we're going to move on to the second portion of our evening, and that is our representatives for the positions of state senator and for state representatives in District 6. So I would welcome to the table our 2 candidates for state senator, Carlos Cardona and Timothy Lang. And our state representatives, we have here with us this evening Kurt Weber, Jonathan Arsenault, Bob McLean, Lena Kirk, David Nagel, and I believe that are the only candidates that are present. We did receive a call from Russell Dumas, who advised that he has a relative who is ill and is unable to attend. And I believe, Jonna, you received a message from Harry Bean that he was unable to attend this evening. The church received the invitation. Just a little reminder about the rules again for this evening with our new selection of candidates. And we do welcome you and thank you all for being here. We are going to ask you again to hold your applause until the end. Our candidates will begin by making an introduction of themselves and, if they choose, their reasons for running for this particular office. And we will keep the same time frame that we have. It's 1 minute for introduction. It's 1.5 minutes when we start asking questions. With all that said, we will begin. And I'm always inclined to start on the left. So we will begin with you, Mr. Weber.
Testing. Now it's working. Now this is unexpected, because in the military with a name like Weber, I always start last. So anyway, I'm Kurt Weber. I've lived in Guilford for 23 years. I'm running for the State House as a moderate Democrat. I have served my entire life, West Point graduate, 23 years in the Army. I was on the school board, coached football, Boy Scouts, one of the founders of Camp Resilience. We've run 130 therapeutic retreats for military veterans, first responders, and their loved ones since 2014. I want to continue to serve in the legislature because I think we need more moderates in government. And the most important thing for any legislator is integrity and a willing to compromise. Integrity is extremely important to me, should be extremely important to everyone. You need to have people in office you can trust to make the right decision. And as far as compromise goes, I understand the valid concerns from folks on both sides of the political spectrum, but I don't necessarily agree with the extremes on either side, but you have to listen to them. You have to be willing then to come to some compromise that no one's happy with, but everyone can live with. That's the definition of democracy.
My name is Jonathan Arsenault. I am someone who grew up here in New Hampshire. I've lived here nearly all my life. I happen to be the one rep on the Democratic side who happens to be from Laconia, so it's kind of weird, but I am the son and grandson of Beth Arsenault and Judy Reaver, who they both served on the Laconia School Board as well as their chairs, helped found the Leaf Committee over in Laconia, as well as my grandmother served in the State Board of Education. I spent a lot of my time as a child watching them do their work in the school board, making sure that we were doing everything we could to look out for all of our students, rich and poor, those who are struggling, and I myself spent about 10 years working local after-school program, Project Extra, over in Laconia, where I got to see, students who were struggling, working alongside, the rest of our families here in the city, and I think over these last few years I've seen our state coming after education, and I wanted to do all that I could to step up and do my part to make sure that we are taking care of our kids.
Good evening, my name is Carlos Cardona. I live in Laconia, New Hampshire. I'm the dad of a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, a boy and a girl, that go to the Laconia schools, and I'm very proud of our schools. I moved here at the age of 17 as a homeless teen. I know firsthand the homeless crisis that is happening in our communities. I've seen it firsthand, and I've experienced it, and I know what it's going to take to solve it. I graduated from the Laconia High School Adult Education Program, later on becoming Student Senate President at the Lakes Region Community College, serving 3 years as an AmeriCorps member, also former school board member, and currently appointed by Governor Sununu to the Commission on New Hampshire Native American Affairs. I was recently a national delegate to the National Convention, making history as a Latino, voting for Harris to be our next president of the United States. I wear my passions on my sleeves. I'm currently going to school, majoring in psychology, a master in psychology. My goal is to address the mental health crisis. If we think we have a problem in society today, wait 10 years from now when our kids that are in our school district are dealing with the stuff that they're dealing with. So that's why I'm running for office. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for having us here, guys. So I'm Tim Lang. I'm your current state senator. So a little background, I'm a father of 4 kids, all of which are products of the public education system, both at the elementary, at the K through 12, as well as the university systems in New Hampshire. I was a police officer for over a decade. I guess the interesting thing is that one of the questions I get asked, how'd you get into this thing? And so I have a whole list of things I've done in the local municipality. First thing I did was I had a business in Tilton. I became a farmer's market director. I then was on the youth assistance board, which is our court diversion program for our children. I then was on the school budget committee, the school board, the town moderator, town budget committee, town zoning board chair, state representative for 3 terms, and now you're state senator. And all those positions, the reason I'm in them is because I was asked, and I said yes. When I was owned the business in Tilton, they asked me if they could put the farmers market up in my parking lot. I said yes, which led to the next year I became the farmers market director. And then once the towns knew I would say yes, that's how I ended up with all those other positions. Someone asked me to run for them, and I did, and so that's where I am.
Hi, thank you very much again for having us here. I'm a real-life dinosaur who's right in front of you. In addition to being a father, a husband, a coach, a Boy Scout leader, an author, and an advocate, I'm also one of the few doctors in the planet that's in the United States that still owns his own private practice. I've worked with people with complex disability now for over 40 years and advocated for their rights for over 40 years. The reason that I ran was for two reasons. Number one was to stand up for them in a more meaningful way than we were doing, but second was to fix a totally dysfunctional healthcare system that you are seeing some results of as to what's going on in the hospital down the street. I've been honored since I've been in the House to be involved in 15 pieces of legislation, sit on 12 committees. I chair 3, vice chair of another, and all of the focus has been to try to improve our health system. We've been very successful in doing things to improve access, decrease cost, improve efficiency, and most important, empower private practice, which is my goal. Thank you.
I did it.
I get a prize.
Is it on? Yes. Okay. My name's Lana Nurk, and I'm a native New Englander, born and raised in Rhode Island, and after many summers in Guilford, I finally got the opportunity to move here permanently in 2016. I got to know the community by working at Taylor Community and as a substance use recovery coach at Navigating Recovery of the Lakes region. I'm retired now, and I volunteer at St. Vincent de Paul as a rental support coordinator, and I volunteer for a group called Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. I'm running for this office because I want to work on issues that are broadly based or supported by the public and that will make our communities safer for children, safer and more hopeful for children and families. One of those issues is obviously education, because all of our children deserve strong public schools so they can get the education they need for a good future. On the safety side, the fact that the leading cause of death for children and adolescents now is gun violence. And so that highlights the need for common sense, bipartisan gun violence prevention measures. I'm also interested in trying to work on the housing crisis. We need a comprehensive climate action plan to protect our environment. And what was the last one? And I support women's health care rights. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you tonight. Thanks for coming. My name is Bob McLean. I have been a resident of Guilford for 30 years. I moved here from Meredith, and I've been basically a Belknap County resident for most of my life. I am married. I have 3 kids who recently graduated from our excellent school system here in Guilford, which now I am a member of the school board here. The thing that got me involved in doing this and why I'm up here is a couple of years ago, I was, like many of you, concerned about things that were happening in our county and in our state. The thing that concerned me the most, that a lot of people involved, was what was happening with our county delegation and gun stock. So I got involved, I ran for office, I came close, then I got elected to the school board, so I've seen a lot of the issues that we have before us. So this time I am out there, I'm talking to people again. I've learned a lot from the school board, I've learned a lot from the budget committee. So I'm basically asking me some questions. I would love to talk to you, and I hope I get your vote in 3 weeks.
Good. Thank you for those introductions. We do appreciate that. And now we're ready for questions. I will remind you again that if you would hold your applause until the end, that you would only ask one question, and we're going to invite all of our candidates to answer the questions. Once again, you will see me alternating the responder of the first question, just to keep this a fair game. So, we are going to begin with the first question, and I look to you, the audience, to raise your hand for that. Do we need to go to the basket? All right, yes, sir.
This is really a question for Dr. Nagel. I'm not sure it's appropriate for everybody else, but whoever wants to take a shot. I have not been able to get a PCP here.
Just a reminder that we have asked that, reminded you that all candidates will have the opportunity to answer the question.
I understand, but it'll be Dr. Nagel's expertise that may be able to give me an answer. My question is, in the last 2 years, we live in a relatively wealthy part of the state right here, and yet we can't attract doctors here. I don't have a PCP here, and I haven't for a year and a half. My practice says, oh, we'll get you one, and then I go see a locum who's gone, I get half an hour, that's who I see, and the next time I see one, it's a different person. So you talk specifically about that. How are we going to address that problem, bringing more qualified physicians into the state?
So I'm going to use my prerogative here, and I'm going to start on my right this time, and I'm going to ask Mr. McLean to answer that question first, and we'll proceed down the row.
I saw the news in the newspaper about the doctors at the Concord Hospital. I'm not really sure how we would attract more doctors to come to the area. The only thing I'm thinking is that the Lakes region is sort of competing with the Dartmouth area, which has an Ivy College there and a doctor school. So that is really, I think, the place that the doctors are attracted to, because that is such a good facility. We would have to try to maybe work with Dartmouth College rather than Concord Hospital to get better physicians up here in a stronger.
I'm thinking statewide, not just regional.
Not just.
How do we attract more doctors statewide? Because if this wealthy region is having difficulty, what about the rest of the state?
I'm not really sure of the answer. I would just say we need to address that in the state to make it a state that's worthwhile living in and practicing medicine in.
Yeah, as someone who also just lost her PCP, I'm not really I wish I had an answer.
I could talk for hours about this. There's a book out there that I wrote that addresses all this stuff. And there's no simple question. This is a nationwide crisis. It is not just a New Hampshire crisis. There's virtually no incentive for a doctor right now to go into primary care unless you are willing to take a lesser paid job to try to pay off all your medical debt, unless you're willing to take a job where you're basically just filing papers. I worked in primary care in Alaska back in the 1980s. I did everything. I didn't have specialists, surgeons, anybody. I did everything, and I loved it. Then you come out in the real world now. It's amazing. The job dissatisfaction among young doctors in primary care is really concerning, and that's a nationwide problem. And I've got a lot of ways that we fix that. One of it is medicine's a monopoly within a monopoly within a monopoly. Whoever has the most money and the most power and the most type A controls where all the money flows. Guess where that goes to? It's not primary care. That's one thing. The second thing is that I believe in subsidies, that we, as a small town, that you start thinking about, well, I want the old town doc back here, and we're willing to subsidize that, help them set up, help them get started to defray all the costs of starting in primary care. Because primary cares do not generate revenue for corporate health care, and we're seeing a crisis in oligopolization of health care that really needs to be stopped, and that's, I could go on I'll stop.
I'll defer my time to you if you want. So thank you. To Dr. Nagel's point, it is a national crisis. We did some bills this year to talk about nursing is another bad situation we have, especially in our nursing homes, trying to attract people who want to go into that field. We did some education incentives this year to try to support both our community college system as well as our university system to attract people into those fields and to help pay some of the educational costs off for them. So it's not a silver bullet that's going to fix it today, but we're hoping that those educational incentives will yield results in the future, and we'll have more New Hampshire students who have taken education at our community college system, RN program out of the community college system, or a four-year system, RN system, and be able to come in and be able to provide some of the services due to the fact that we're having a harder time getting doctors. And we've changed some of the laws to allow some nurses, and the doc can always get which the names are, ARPN, APRN, be able to do some services not under the supervision of doctor, because they've got the training and don't need a doctor to supervise them, and they're able to do one of those services. So we've changed some of the laws to allow some of the current medical people to be able to provide services that currently before they used to have a supervision of a doctor to do. Again, the idea being provide health care to more people.
I actually am not a doctor, but I love this question. As somebody who's majoring a master's in psychology, the shortage of professional workers in the medicine field, it's across the board. How about we start fixing our housing crisis so that people can afford to live in the Lakes region? How about we fund Planned Parenthood, for example, so that it can provide medical services in rural communities? I think if we start doing those two things alone, we start heading in a direction. It's not going to fix the problem, but it's definitely going to help. So those are from my experience. I know the city of Laconia has been discussing workforce housing for firefighters, police officers, and teachers. Why don't we design an area in the Lakes region where, hey, doctors can live and nurses can live, where we can subsidize? I'm all for it, helping our community. But unfortunately, the State House has been very focused on defunding these programs that I'm speaking of, including the Housing Stability Fund just ran out of money. So those are the type of things that as a senator I would support to have an immediate effect in our communities. And then of course having a longer term conversation as to how do we attract doctors to our area? How do we promote that in our colleges and our universities? I think we have a huge resource here in the Lakes Region Community College, which I happen to be a product of. So again, where there's a will, there's a way. And I think we have leaders with lack of vision. And so when you have leaders that are young and professional, you start getting solutions.
Okay, there we go. So this is something that I have to agree I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on, but I have to agree with Carlos here that if we want to bring anyone here, including doctors, including anybody who we want to come spend their lives here and provide well-needed resources, we need to invest more in ourselves as a state and things that will bring people here, that make people want to live here. That does involve, doing something about the housing crisis, making it so more people can move here, so there can be more patients, there can be more customers. We need to invest more in our schools so that we can have more people who want to put their kids in them, because doctors and nurses come with families. They have a whole part of their community to support, and we also need to think back to how we provide back to that ourselves, and that comes down to education as well. We do have a valuable resource in the community college. We have programs set up to get kids started early from high school, working and getting into these fields. And we need to invest more in making sure that we are helping to guide our students and give kids a reason to look into these fields and to help provide that for ourselves. And I think that could all do something in order to bring more people here to this state.
So this is a complex issue that touches a bunch of other issues. Some of them have already been mentioned. Affordable housing. In order to attract people to come, you got to have affordable housing. You got to have a quality public education. And I'm not really being facetious when I say this. Climate change. We may actually get a help there, because as the south of this country gets increasingly unlivable because of the heat, because of the hurricanes, because of the floods. We're going to get a lot of climate refugees coming up here. Maybe some of them will be doctors. Yeah, but, and then, and I'm sure Dr. Nagel could, the whole problem with our broken healthcare system, with the fee-for-service as opposed to results-based, and the profit motive of the hospitals, all that type of stuff is just, it's a very complex problem that, we need to work on, how much we can do with the State House, the State Senate, even in the, it's a nationwide problem, but it's a very complex issue.
Right. Thank you for those thoughtful responses. We appreciate that. I believe we are ready for the second question from our audience. Yes, sir.
Yes, good evening. I'm just curious, I'd like to hear from each of the candidates. Gun violence, drug overdose. Which problem affects the state of New Hampshire more? And then a couple of words as to how you would solve this problem.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to turn to you first, Ms. Nurk.
I'm trying to think of how to answer whether a bigger problem is gun violence or, do you say overdose death or just?
Yes, drug overdose in the state of New Hampshire.
It's hard to, they're very different kinds of problems. They do share some factors that overlap in terms of, you can look at the drug problem as, a lot of hopeless, it's not, it's nothing that anybody wants to happen, but the drugs are so strong that once it takes over, it can just destroy lives. Gun violence overall in New Hampshire, we have a very safe state. But the reality is 88% of our gun violence is suicide by gun, which is also they call the deaths of despair, where people are just hopeless. And when lethal methods are within easy reach, it's devastating for families who lose somebody when there's something that could have been done if the methods weren't as available. So, there are things you can do to, in terms of suicide prevention, in terms of just having red flag laws, which if there had been something like that in Lewiston, there would be, it was clear that the gentleman was troubled, and if we could have, temporarily removed weapons, perhaps many lives would have been saved. So it's hard to pick which is worse, but they're both pretty devastating.
Thank you. I liked everything you just said. I think they're both significant problems. Numerically, overdose is a bigger issue. I think my background. I'm a pain specialist. I actually wrote all the state opioid prescribing rules about 30 years ago in an attempt to prevent what ended up happening. I still believe if people had actually listened to what we wrote, we could have avoided a lot of the problems we had. With that said, I then wrote a book that's sitting out there about pain and public policy, and addiction is part of that whole thing. I also sit on the Opioid Abatement Commission, and the nice thing about doing that, I'm the vice chair of that, the nice thing of being on that commission is we work with the Governor's Council on alcohol and other drugs. Don't forget alcohol, it's a big deal. Don't forget cannabis abuse, it's a big deal. They're all big deals. But anyways, what we did was we looked at a crosstalk of all the services in the state of New Hampshire. We looked at what do we have, what don't we have, what do we need. And what was amazing is we have all these, we have recovery things, they're okay. We have other things that are okay. What was a huge hole in the entire state was how do we look at the concept of prevention? How do we prevent drug overdose? How do we do this and that and the other thing? And that really bothered me. We have $330 million to spend over 18 years, and we weren't even focusing on that. So I brought that up. I said, if I had my way, 85% of the dollars would go to that. So I hope that answers your question, but I think that's the bigger issue, numerically.
So again, I'm not going to argue with the doctor. I think drug overdoses are probably the bigger issue as far as numbers go. Gun violence is also an issue, but both of them are rooted in mental health issues, right? I mean, both of those have a core problem at the bottom of it is mental health. If you remember, I know Mr. McLean over there was talking about the gun stock and the delegation a few years ago, and I was one of the representatives that voted. The governor created the new hub and spoke model to be able to take care of drug abuse problems and to allow counties to be able to have more money to be able to deal directly with the drug issue that was going on back 4, 5, 6 years ago when it really started taking root. And I was one that supported that program, one of the few. It was a pretty close vote, if I remember right, by one vote. But I supported that program because I think that care is the answer, right? Again, making sure that when someone's ready for care and they open the door, there's someone there to help them. And so we've supported multiple programs. There's a phrase, and I'm going to blow it, there's a phrase about one door is a program that the state mental health program is trying to do, and it's basically is when you walk in the door, no matter what your issue is, we'll find you the answer. We're not going to send you out the door to somebody else. And so the state's been embracing the one-door model and its two-on-one model and everything else. So I think, again, providing services is the key for mental health, to be able to allow that one-door model. When somebody's ready for services or wants services, they're never turned away.
Well, I agree with most people here about the fact that substance abuse disorder is a bigger threat to society right now. I also want us to understand what our kids are going through in school right now, the mental health impact that it's having, gun violence on them, even if it's not happening in our communities, the impact that it has on parents, the fact that every parent on their first day of school, the first thought they think of is, what is my kid going to deal with today in our school? And let me remind you, Laconia has had more threats this year than I have seen in a while. The fact that every parent got an alarm on their phones going off saying there's a lockdown in your school. So I do think that this is a long-term, and as somebody that works in mental health, this is something that we're going to see the effects of, not right now, but possibly 10 years from now. And also the staff and teachers that are working and dealing with all this extra stuff that they have to learn to deal with gun violence. But going back to substance abuse disorder, my partner has struggled with substance abuse disorder his whole entire adult life. His brother died at the age of 25. My best friend, Honorable Phil Spagnuolo, died not long ago. And these are people that have shaped my life and my thinking and my understanding about substance abuse disorder. And let me tell you, when I become a state senator, I'm not going to be focused on doing tours at the State House. I'm going to be focused on how do we change the lives of every person that lives in Laconia and in the region that are affected by substance abuse disorder. Let's remember, the Lakes region had the highest death rates of substance abuse disorder, drug overdoses in the area. So to me, that's something close to home, and it's something that I'm going to be fighting for when I'm in the Senate.
I'm not certain if I'd want to compare the two issues. I think they are both very, very important issues, and while one may be more common within the state, I believe that gun violence is something that can happen nearly anywhere. Both are something that can come from mental health. It can be an effect of hopelessness, but when it comes to guns, it comes to where people have access to those guns. But getting on to addiction and drug overdoses, as Carlos is saying, here in Laconia, in the county, we have faced at times the highest drug overdose rates within the state per capita. I saw multiple friends of mine either go through overdoses, or multiple students from mine and my brother's classes die from overdose. And I think what we have found really helps is to catch and stop it early. Drug overdose and drug use very much comes down to, having access, place to be, good education, and, local programs have been working on providing a means of stopping kids from getting started on drugs in the first place. And the biggest way they have found to fight that is to make sure that these kids have a place to be, to have a place to go after school, and to not have time spent at home worrying. So I think we need to invest more in school programs, educational programs, and make sure they don't get started in the first place.
I think gun violence and drug abuse are actually symptoms, and they're symptoms of the bigger threat, which has already been discussed, mental health. And I've learned a lot in the last 10 years running camp resilience retreats. I'm also the president of the board of the Lakes Region Veterans Coalition, which is a veteran suicide prevention effort. And, you know, gun violence, suicide, drug abuse, most of those are caused by mental health issues. And so we need to have better mental health care in this county, in this state, in this country, and have effective programs so that we can reach out to folks at risk and help them before they resort to violence, before they resort to drugs. You know, things like yellow flag laws, red flag laws can also help. But the bottom line is we really need to address the mental health crisis. And it's, I think, Carlos, you mentioned it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse, the aftermath of the pandemic, the effect that's had on the young folks in this country. It's getting worse, and it needs to be addressed.
I don't know if there's a good choice between the two, but what I will address is the drug overdose, I think, is the issue that is mainly affecting us here in New Hampshire. It, as everyone else said, they all got good opinions. We need to do something about it. I went to the mayor's task force meeting a couple years ago on the homeless issue in Laconia and what could be done and what the police department had found out about it. And they had people that came in that were actually homeless to speak with the rest of us that were there. And they said a lot of the people that are homeless living in Laconia, the reason they're in Laconia is because that's where their services are, that they can get help navigating recovery. I think they have Isaiah 61. So these people can get fed and do whatever. A lot of them become addicted to the drugs after they become homeless out of desperation. So there's one issue leads to another issue. And I really think what we need to do is help these institutions that are helping these people that are homeless, first to get them a place to live and to try to keep them from taking that course to addiction. And the other thing is we need to make stiffer penalties for the drug dealers. I really think if you look at the bail issues now, I won't say the bail, but the real drug pin, we need to get it out. The fentanyl is so dangerous, a tiny little like tip of a pin is enough to kill you now. And these people that are on drugs, they're not thinking straight.
So the only thing I wanted to add was to that gentleman's question. We have the same exact issue with mental health as we do PCPs, is that very few people are going into the field, and those that are in the field are retiring out of the field. And again, we've done some educational incentives, but I don't know that there's a silver bullet to the mental health, the lack of services. We're struggling to try to find providers. I'm meeting with Chief Kelly from here as well as Matt from Laconia to discuss the crisis intervention teams that we created by Senator Guy and I's bill to deal with mental health issues. They're telling me they can't get counselors to come out when they have an issue. And so we're trying to figure out how we're going to fix that. So just know that it's a similar problem as the primary care physician issue we were talking about. I didn't want to say PCP because we're talking about drugs.
And yes, Dr. Nagel, you may speak.
Yeah, in the Opioid Abatement Commission and the Governor's Commission and a number of the other commissions that we work on, we have great ideals. We need this person, this person, this person, this person. It all comes back down to funding source, funding source, funding source, funding source. The primary payment for most of these things is Medicaid that pays a fraction of the rate of everybody else, and that's why they can't attract people into those fields and why we struggle to provide those services. So we need to be a little bit more creative. That's why I would like to use the opioid abatement money for things like that, so that we can try to improve services and find alternative funding sources so that we can block that.
Can I do a follow-up?
Yes.
So for me, again, it's about being creative. We've mentioned that. The solution, part of the solution would be like, for example, in the 1970s, free community colleges. That was very common in our communities. So going back to that, giving students incentives to go into those fields, to create the jobs that we need. So I think working with our community colleges, we don't do often enough. And oftentimes we're going after them. For example, UNH, the state house goes after UNH all the time. So these are some of the ideas that I have. And of course, it goes back to housing again. I know a couple of therapists and psychologists that work at the school that I work at. They cannot afford to live here, especially if they just got out of college. So they're going to places like New York City, where an apartment is cheaper. So again, it comes down to these problems. So again, I just wanted to follow up that I think these are incredible solutions.
All right, thank you. And we have one more follow-up.
I just wanted to echo the issue of addiction, especially once somebody can get into recovery, people think, okay, they went to rehab, now it's all set. The early recovery is a very challenging phase, and it really does overlap with the housing issue, because safe housing, continued services, sometimes it doesn't have to be as full medical treatment, but at that point it's support on being able to get a recovery job, to sort of get back into life, because some of the most devastating part is once somebody has achieved some amount of recovery, and then real life is hard and the bills keep coming in, and it's hard to keep them from going back. So the more we can address some of the livability issues and being able to work and live in the community and in an affordable way, we would see an improvement in opioid problems.
Thank you. We all happy with follow-up now? Okay. All right. Very thoughtful responses. Thank you all. So let's move on to the next question. I see a hand raised in the back.
As a member of the county delegation, the most important vote we'll take is on the county budget. And my first question would be to ask you what departments of county government do you feel need attention? But I'd like to take it a bit further. In the past, the county assisted in providing some funding to outside agencies for services that assisted all our towns: healthcare, mental health, economic development, municipal aid. And with the exception for extension service, which is still funded because it's required by law, these funds have been eliminated or depleted. What outside services might you consider returning funding to, and why?
All right. Do we understand the question? Did we hear it all? Did not hear it all. Okay. So I think, just to phrase your last question, it is what outside services that you will be voting on as a county representative. Are you still interested in continuing as part of the county budget? And so, Dr. Nagel, I believe you're first.
There were two parts to that question. The first part was what part of the county delegation or budget you would want me to focus on, and then the second was outside agencies. Is that correct?
The outside agencies, but my real, if we have time, I'd really like to know which outside agencies you return funding to.
I'll be honest. I've been there for a year and a half, so I don't know which ones we don't fund anymore. New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, I've worked a fair amount with outside of here, especially in some of the pain management things I do. They do amazing work, but they're currently funded, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a good answer for that. As far as the other part of the question that you asked, one of my favorite county agencies is the Office of Restorative Justice, which kind of ties back into the things that we've been talking about here. They help young people who've kind of screwed up, frequently related to drugs, and they help them fix their lives before it's too late. It gets me back into that preventative message. I really think that that's one of the more important agencies that we have, and it's one of my favorites, and I will always support them.
Luckily, I'm not on the county delegation anymore, so I don't have to vote on those. But what I would tell you is, again, for the 3 terms I was on the county delegation, I supported the outside agencies, going to bat multiple times for things like the Conservation District, the cooperative, the Community Action Program for Meals on Wheels. Some of those agencies, on a regular basis, there was a phrase called the Lang Gang for a while, which was a block of delegation members that were voting in favor of these things, even though the reason Mr. McLean got in, the other majority portion of the delegation that existed then were voting against those things on a regular basis. So again, I think there are very important things like the Conservation District is my favorite one. The amount of money, the amount of effort they bring in compared to the amount of money they give them is phenomenal, and they do a great job. So to those, if you get elected, if you get on, make sure you continue to support that program.
For me, between Gunstock and, of course, a county nursing home, a quick little story. Every Christmas, I bring my kids and volunteer at the county nursing home, and we join a bunch of other Laconia residents to sing Christmas carols. And every single time I am reminded how understaffed and underfunded our county nursing home is, yet they still show up for their jobs, they still deliver, and those residents are very happy and well taken care of. And I think oftentimes, just like the county jail, we kind of lock up and throw the keys. We think of our county nursing home in many ways that way when it comes to funding. We forget that these residents are there and they deserve dignity and they deserve services. And once upon a time, they were like us, contributing. They were in the community, paying taxes. So to me, it is something that I do with my kids, and hopefully instilling in them that we should not forget about our elderly and the people that taught us everything that we know. So forever, that will always be my favorite part of our budget that we get to fund.
I really don't have a whole lot of knowledge on outside agencies, but I do have to agree with Carlos. I think this comes back to why a lot of professional doctors and nurses don't often come here. I think we need to invest more in paying our nurses at the local county home. We need to make sure that our own staff are being paid as well as we possibly can, because they have to compete with other homes, hospitals in order to get staff. And I also have to agree, any kind of funding that we can put towards fighting drug abuse, anything that we can put towards keeping children, kids from eventually ending up in such a position, anything we can do is always worth investing in. And of course, Gunstock, it's always important that we are funding the things that make our community what it is, that make people want to live here, that bring people here and keep so many of our people employed. But I will move on to the next.
I'm not aware of all of the different outside agencies that are mentioned, even though I agree with Dave about the and I forget what you call it, the one for the taking care of the drug offenders and things like that. That restorative justice, yeah. And I'm familiar with the issues facing the nursing home, and it's like everything else in government. You've got limited resources and you have a lot of needs, and so the delegation has to look at funding, has to look at additional sources of revenue, and then figure out what's the best way to deliver the needed services with the the budget constraints you have, and there needs to be that done in a non-ideological manner. And that's kind of the important thing, is that we've had members in the county delegation that were for following their own agenda for ideological reasons, and I won't do that. I'll work with all the members of the delegation, again, to look at ways to raise more revenue and ways to take the use the limited resources to meet as many of the needs as we can.
From my understanding on the county budget, when I went last year, Gunstock is actually making money and they're reinvesting money. I've stayed in touch with them and they're doing a really good job. Right now, they've got a new parking lot, they're building a new building at the front. I think that we should keep Gunstock on the same course that it's on right now. It's really been night and day from 2 years ago till today. The other thing that I would not be for is to try to privatize our nursing home. I would not want to privatize getting a private company in here to run the jail. I think once you get private companies in here, it becomes less about the people that are living there. It becomes less about the prisoners. It wouldn't be as safe, and it would be more about making money than taking care of the people that we have to take care of. My other thing is I would like to look at what the other counties around the state do for their budget and how they pay for their services compared to what we do in this county. The amount of tax dollars that each citizen in Belknap County pays towards the county services is really a very small amount of tax dollars. I think it should be looked at.
I would want to echo the support of the restorative justice program, and also a program I worked in when I was at Navigating was in the jail while people are in the county jail because of drug-related offenses, that they can start their recovery program there. And it's sort of in the theme of the more broad you can have services available at all different places, you can reduce recidivism in terms of crimes related to drugs and sort of start people and support them in their recovery journey. But I also, I don't exactly know how that program's funded, but that and restorative justice can be really important on the drug side. And of course, I support the nursing home because we're all aging here in New Hampshire. I think we're one of the oldest states, and we really do need to fund, and it's, work for people. It's really something that's important.
Thank you. Yes, you may.
I just wanted to speak about Gunstock. It was referenced a few times, including by myself. I want to be clear, you guys know that not one penny of your county tax dollars goes to support Gunstock. It's a completely self-sufficient agency, and we want to leave it that way, and we fought to keep it that way. Their revenue stream, actually, for the county that work to donate money or give money to the county to lower your taxes. So there was a statement around taxation or conversation around Gunstock. We don't put a penny into Gunstock. Gunstock is completely self-sufficient, and not only that, they give us revenue to keep your county tax dollars lower.
Very good. Follow up? Yes,
yeah,
Mr. Cardona.
The subject around Gunstock is one that I'm passionate about because some members that sit here and also that are elected to office were the same people that were all for privatizing the one program in the county that actually brings in money to the county. But I also am hearing a lot of we're limited resources. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a limited mindset, and we have leaders that are not prioritizing what we should be prioritizing in our communities. That's what we have. We don't have a limited resources. Granite Staters are resourceful. We are giving. I came here as a homeless person, and I am now a business owner and an educated, well-being individual, raising kids here and very successful. We are a great state. We can do great things. What we have is a lack of imagination. Leaders that are in office not prioritizing our counties, what we have, and prioritizing national agendas that bring here all the wrong ideas. That's what we have. If we take money away from the voucher system, guess what? We will have a lot more money in our budget to fund some of these programs that we really deserve in our community. So that's really what we have. So I keep hearing limited. As a young person, I hate hearing that because I tell my daughter every single day, the sky is the limit. We have no limits. We have limits for what we become what we think. And that's really what we have in our State House and our Senate.
We have another follow-up. Yes, sir.
I'm a little bit concerned about that statement because one of the projects that I've been involved in is looking at all the services that we have in this state for different entities and what do we have. And when we look out, and then how do we make the public aware of what those things are? When we looked out and found out there's a lot, like I'm kind of actually agreeing with you. We have a lot of resources out there right now that nobody knows that they even exist. And then we looked at duplicity, like how many people are doing the same thing that together could do the same thing better. And so one of the things of the crosstalk we did with the Governor's Commission was actually figure out what all these entities are, how do we bring them together as one and not waste money on two things that are doing the exact same thing and bring them together. So I think the imagination's there. It's just it's a matter of bringing it together, making the public aware of it, and being a lot more fiscally responsible about how we do it. But I think the imagination, I think as you kind of said, is there.
All right. So follow-up. Yes, Mr. Weber.
First, I'd just like to, I'm also a huge fan of Gunstock. So on the ski patrol there for 19 years. And it is, what was happening a few years ago, they were trying to kill the goose that laid the golden egg, which is just absolutely brain dead. And then as far as Carlos, you're talking about imagination, you can't deny that there are limited resources, limited tax dollars. We have to come up with other ways to generate revenue. Legalizing marijuana and having state-run stores and tax the heck out of it, that's a great way to raise some revenue. There's lots of ways that we can raise revenue that we have to think of because we have to fund these critical services. And in order to do that, we have to raise revenue.
All right. Are we all happy? All good with follow-up? All right. I'm getting the signal. Can we do one more question, do you think? One more. I'm looking straight at you, sir. I'm sorry. First person. Go ahead.
What's your position and thinking on cannabis legalization, particularly whether you would favor eliminating criminal penalties for personal use and consumption and growing at home, cultivation, and also if you would be in favor of commercial adult retail sales, would you prefer that we have more like the state liquor commission model where the state is basically the primary or the exclusive retailer of the product, or would you favor more of a private sector, private enterprise model where retailers are licensed?
So, Mr. Lang, I'm looking at you for the first response.
Thank you for that. So, Nate, I know you very well. Nate works in the marijuana industry. So I served on the commission for marijuana over the summer. I also was one of the architects of the plan that was passed by the Senate. But one of the things we learned, again, I will never pass marijuana for the revenue, just to be clear. It's not about the money. Otherwise, I'm nothing more than a drug dealer, right? What I think is that people have the right to do it, and they should have that liberty if they choose to consume. That being said, I supported the state model. Again, I was a major architect of moving the model over to through the Senate and getting it through the Senate and sent it to the House, which killed it. But we did move a state model. But one of the things I heard most on the commission was children, about access to children, how children get it. So it was a heavily regulated model. It was heavily regulated in terms of access. It was heavily regulated in terms of advertising. And I supported that model, the same model that the Governor Sununu supported, and I voted for that. I don't consume, and again, like I said earlier, I was a police officer, but I think that if you want to use it in your home I have no problem with that. I have problems, and I don't have any penalty. I do have a problem with public consumption. I wanted heavy penalties for public consumption, and reason being is, if you're drinking a beer on the steps of a store, I don't get drunk. You're smoking a joint on the steps of a store, I can test positive. And so because of that, that could put my job at risk and everything else. So I was in favor of heavy penalties for public consumption, but what you do in the privacy of your own home is all yours.
Unlike my opponent, I actually believe in a live free or die model of cannabis legalization. I believe that local business owners should be able to sell it. I believe that our local farms should be able to benefit from this. And I do think that it's actually a gold rush. So I do think it will have a huge economic impact. We have seen our neighbor states benefit from it, and I think that could be a great way to start closing the loopholes here in funding in our state. That said, I would be in favor of any model really, as long as it's a path to legalization. And I would go even further. I would be in favor of expunging cannabis. Sorry, I'm spacing the name. So anybody who has that crime, that has committed a crime with cannabis and has been gone to jail for it, I'd be in favor of expunging it also. Because I think that cannabis should not hold somebody back from holding a job, their background. That said, yeah, I'm in favor of legalization. Cannabis saved my mom's life when she was going through cancer, and she's still here with me today because of it. So I believe that it's a great product for our communities. That said, when it comes to children's safety, obviously I think it should be treated just like alcohol gets treated at the liquor stores.
So it feels kind of strange, but I think it's many years on. It feels like both sides largely agree that at this point it's time to catch up with the rest of the country, where all of our neighbors have all moved on to just legalizing and having standard regulations surrounding marijuana. People are going to be doing it. Kids will be, not kids, students always tend to get it whether we were selling it or not. So it's best to get it under a regulatory nature to make it something